The sun was sinking behind the glass towers of the city, pulling a blanket of orange and gray across the streets. Neon signs flickered to life, as if the city itself was preparing for its second shift. For Marisol, this was the most vulnerable part of the day, the time when she often felt caught between light and darkness, between the bustling rhythm of daytime safety and the lonely uncertainty of night. Her backpack, worn from years of use, dug into her shoulders as she adjusted the straps. It wasn't just any backpack. Inside lay the fragile pieces of her hard work. A laptop that carried her essays, job applications, and scholarship drafts, and a carefully packed folder of documents she planned to drop off in the morning. Her wallet, with her ID and bus pass, was tucked into an inner pocket. Every zipper had been double-checked before she left the library. To anyone else, the backpack was just another bag. To her, it was the weight of her future. The streets were still busy near the busier intersections. Couples strolled out of cafes, laughing and carrying leftover pastry bags. Suited workers walked briskly toward parking garages, phones pressed against their ears. Vendors were rolling carts back inside, their voices still echoing. Last call for hot dogs. Last call. The usual city music, honks, chatter, footsteps, played around her, and for a while, she felt like she belonged in that crowd. But as she pushed forward, her bus stop only 3 blocks away, the density of people thinned. The sidewalks grew wider and emptier. The chatter faded, leaving behind the occasional bark of a stray dog or the metallic hum of the streetlight overhead. She checked her phone. 7:42 p.m. Not late enough to panic, but just late enough for her instincts to sharpen. It wasn't the first time she had felt uneasy in the city. Growing up, her mother always warned her about the difference between being careful and being careless. Careful, her mother had said, is knowing which streets are safe. Careless is pretending danger doesn't exist. Those words had guided her before, but tonight, her shortcuts seemed harmless. She just wanted to get home, and her legs ached from hours of studying. Still, something felt wrong. It began with a sound faint, but present, footsteps, not the scattered rhythm of a casual passerby, but heavier, in sync, following hers. At first, she told herself it was nothing. People walked behind each other all the time. But the longer she listened, the more her chest tightened. These weren't random footsteps. They matched her pace. When she slowed, they slowed. When she quickened, they quickened. She gripped the straps tighter, knuckles whitening. Without turning her head, she glanced at the reflections in a darkened store window. 2 figures, male. Their shadows loomed long across the pavement. They weren't close enough to grab her, but they weren't distant either. They were tracking her movements, like wolves testing the space between themselves and their prey. Her stomach knotted. She considered crossing the street, but traffic was steady and quick. She'd have to dart dangerously between cars. The next block was dimly lit, only one flickering bulb above a closed pawn shop. She regretted the turn instantly. The vibrant crowds she had left behind were gone, replaced by stretches of sidewalk that felt too exposed, too quiet. For a moment, she thought about ducking into one of the side alleys. Maybe she could find another way to loop back toward a busier street. But then she caught herself. Alleys could be traps. If these men were indeed following her, she would corner herself by stepping into one. No, the open sidewalk, as empty as it felt, was safer. Her breaths grew shallow. She tried to act normal, forcing her steps to stay even, resisting the urge to break into a run. Running would confirm her fear. Running might provoke them. But her body betrayed her. Her shoulders stiffened, her stride shortened, and her hands trembled as they clutched the straps. Memories flashed, stories she'd overheard in the news, classmates whispering about muggings on the way home, her cousin losing his wallet and phone just last month, after someone followed him off a train. She had listened politely, even sympathetically, but deep down, she always thought those things happened to other people, not to her. She was careful. She was smart. Yet here she was, caught in the unfolding tension of one of those very stories. The city around her seemed to grow quieter still. A neon sign buzzed, and the wind rattled a loose can across the pavement. Even the rhythm of her own breathing felt too loud, as if the men behind her could hear her panic. She dared another look, this time in the faint reflection of a parked car's window. The men were closer now. She couldn't make out their expressions, but their posture told enough. One leaned slightly forward, shoulders hunched as though preparing to lunge at any moment. The other adjusted something in his pocket, his eyes never leaving her. A chill ran through her. She thought about calling someone, her mother, a friend, even the police. But what would she say? 2 men are walking behind me? What if she was wrong, and they were just 2 strangers heading in the same direction? She could almost hear the impatience in a dispatcher's voice. No, she decided she'd wait. Just 1 more block. If they followed her past the intersection, then she'd know. Her pace quickened, the straps biting deeper into her shoulders. She could see the glow of the bus stop sign in the distance, small but reassuring. It felt like a lighthouse guiding her through rough seas. If she could make it there, she would be surrounded by people again, waiting commuters, drivers, maybe even another officer. But every step toward the stop felt heavier, as though the city had stretched the block longer just to test her resolve. The footsteps behind her grew clearer, crunching against the uneven pavement in cruel synchronization with her own. She wanted to look back again, to confirm her fears, but something told her not to. Looking back might reveal too much. Her fear, her vulnerability, her acknowledgement of them. Instead, she kept her eyes locked ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line, her heart beating so hard it threatened to choke her. She thought about the contents of her bag. The laptop, the papers, her ID. Losing them would mean weeks, maybe months of rebuilding. But worse than losing them was the thought of losing herself. Being dragged into shadows, disappearing into a headline. A car drove by slowly, music thumping from its speakers. For a second, Marisol thought about waving it down, even throwing herself in front of it. But it sped off at the next light, leaving her in silence again. She swallowed hard. One of the men laughed, a short, low chuckle. It wasn't the laugh of someone amused. It was the laugh of someone confident. The sound twisted her stomach, confirming what she already feared. They weren't coincidental passers-by. They were following her, waiting for the right moment. Her hand twitched toward her phone, but she forced it back to her side. No sudden movements, she told herself. Just keep walking. Get to the bus stop. Get to the light. But deep down, she knew. She had turned onto the wrong corner tonight, and the night was only beginning. The glow of the bus stop seemed close, but the street she had taken to get there betrayed her almost instantly. It was narrower than she remembered, a shortcut she had walked once or twice in daylight, but never at dusk. The storefronts here were mostly shuttered, their gates pulled down with graffiti scrawled across them. The only signs of life were the dull hum of a neon pawn shop sign and a flickering light above a laundromat that was already closed. Marisol felt the emptiness press down on her. Gone were the couples laughing outside bakeries. Gone were the streams of office workers hurrying to cars. This stretch belonged to shadows. Her footsteps echoed too loudly on the pavement, bouncing back from brick walls, exposing her in the silence. The 2 men had not turned off. They were still there, just far enough to keep their pursuit from being obvious, but close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. She hadn't looked back directly, but she didn't need to. Every fiber of her being told her they were still watching. Her thoughts raced. Maybe she could step into a store, but which one? Every door she passed was locked, every window dark. Maybe she could call someone, but her hands felt clumsy, her phone buried in her bag. Maybe she could run, but her lungs already burned with the tension of simply walking. And if she ran, she feared they'd take it as invitation. Her mother's words floated back to her. Careful is knowing which streets are safe. Careless is pretending danger doesn't exist. I was careless, Marisol whispered under her breath. She tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack. The weight of it seemed heavier now, almost punishing, as if her future were literally dragging her down when she most needed to be free. She thought of the laptop inside, all the hours she had spent writing applications for scholarships that might be her only ticket to finishing college. She thought of her passport and ID, things that would take months to replace if lost. And beneath all that, she thought of her sense of dignity. If these men stole it from her, she wouldn't just lose a bag. She would lose a piece of herself. The flickering laundromat bulb buzzed above her as she passed, the kind of unreliable light that looked more sinister than safe. She slowed slightly, pretending to check her phone, though she didn't pull it out. She hoped the performance might make her seem casual, in control, not as terrified as she was. From behind her came another sound, a cough, deliberate and sharp, then a chuckle. Her chest constricted. They weren't even hiding anymore. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Just 2 more blocks, she whispered. Just 2 more. The sidewalk dipped into uneven slabs, cracks filled with weeds. A trash bag lay ripped open near a lamppost, its contents spilling into the gutter. She sidestepped it, her eyes scanning for any sign of another person. Someone, anyone. But there was no one. This street seemed abandoned to her, and to them. She thought of ducking into the alley between buildings, but one look told her it was a trap. Narrow, dark, with chain-link fencing blocking the far end. If she went there, she'd be cornered. She pressed on. Behind her, the men's footsteps grew louder. Not rushing, not yet, but closing in with deliberate certainty. She imagined their expressions, the way predators must look at prey when they know the chase is almost over. Her stomach twisted. She clenched her fists so hard, her nails dug into her palms. Don't panic. Don't show them you're afraid. Just keep walking. Her eyes darted ahead again. The bus stop was visible now, its thin metal frame glinting beneath the streetlight. Relief surged through her. People were there, she thought. There had to be people. But as she drew closer, her hope sank. The bench was empty. The stop was deserted. Her heart dropped like a stone. The realization hit her in waves. She was still 2 long blocks away, alone, with no help in sight. The sound of a soda can being kicked broke the silence. She flinched, realizing the noise had come from behind her. They were no longer keeping their pursuit subtle. They wanted her to know. They wanted her to feel the fear tighten around her, like a noose. She thought again of pulling out her phone. Her hand trembled as she slipped it halfway from her pocket. But what then? Would she dial 911 and pray for someone to arrive in minutes when she only had seconds? Would she call her mother? Make her listen helplessly from miles away? No, there was no time for either. She shoved the phone back. The pawn shop ahead was the only building with light. Its window displayed old guitars, tarnished watches, and cracked TVs, but the door was locked. A sign taped crookily inside, closed. Back tomorrow. She paused for the briefest second, pressing her fingers against the cool glass as if silently begging for safety. Then she moved on. Her pulse roared in her ears. The bus stop's glow seemed closer, but every step toward it stretched into eternity. She knew then that shortcuts weren't always shorter. Sometimes they lengthened the night, stretched fear until it consumed you. Another laugh, closer now. Her throat went dry. She could almost feel their presence behind her, the heat of their attention burning across her back. She pictured their hands reaching out, yanking the straps from her shoulders, dragging her down to the pavement. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. Her body screamed to run. Her brain argued to stay calm. She tried to compromise, quickening her pace until she was nearly jogging, though she forced her breathing to remain controlled. The shadows of the two men grew longer across the pavement, stretching toward her, threatening to overtake her. Every sense was on fire now. The flick of a pigeon's wings made her flinch. The creak of a street sign in the wind sounded like a taunt. Even the rhythm of her own steps betrayed her. Too loud, too frantic. Then a sudden sound. A voice. One of the men spoke, low and deliberate. "She's not going anywhere." Her chest tightened. She almost stumbled. The words weren't meant for her ears, but they reached her all the same, coiling around her like chains. She looked up. The bus stop loomed closer. The street light above it buzzed faintly, its halo of light spilling across the empty bench. 2 more blocks. 2 more eternal, impossible blocks. Marisol straightened her shoulders, forcing her steps steady, though every part of her wanted to sprint. She thought of her mother again, of her cousin, of every story she'd ever heard. And she realized this was her story now. She had turned down the wrong corner, and the corner was about to turn on her. It happened faster than her mind could prepare for. One moment, Marisol was walking, her pulse hammering as she tried to convince herself she still had some control. The next, the world exploded into violence. A hand shot out from behind, thick fingers curling around the strap of her backpack. The yank was so strong it snapped her backward, her shoulder blades slamming into the chest of the man closest to her. Air rushed from her lungs in a shocked gasp. Before she could scream, another set of hands gripped her wrist and twisted hard, sending a bolt of pain up her arm. "Got her," one of them hissed. Her mouth opened, and the scream came, raw, primal, tearing into the night air. The sound bounced off the brick walls, carrying further than she thought possible. But instead of rushing footsteps coming to her aid, there was only hesitation from the few scattered pedestrians down the block. A man exiting the pawn shop across the street froze mid-step, his eyes widening. A woman tugged her child closer and turned away. Fear was contagious, and no one seemed willing to catch it. Marisol thrashed, her feet scraping against the pavement as she tried to twist free. The backpack was her lifeline, her entire future bundled inside, and the thought of losing it filled her with a panic deeper than the pain in her arm. She clawed at the man's wrist, her nails digging into flesh, but his grip didn't loosen. The other attacker snarled, tugging at the bag with both hands, trying to rip it free from her shoulders. "Let go, you stupid! No!" Marisol screamed, her voice cracking. The struggle turned frantic. One man tried to unzip the bag, his fingers fumbling as she twisted and jerked. The zipper screeched halfway open, spilling a corner of papers that fluttered to the ground like white feathers. Her scholarship essays, neatly stapled applications, the letters she'd written and rewritten until they were perfect, all scattered into the dirty gutter. "No!" she cried again, diving forward, trying to cover them with her free hand. But the attackers dragged her back, their strength overwhelming. Her knees scraped against the rough concrete. A sharp sting tore across her skin, and warmth bloomed where blood began to trickle. The pain only fueled her desperation. She kicked backward wildly, her heel connecting with one man's shin. He cursed loudly, shoving her harder against the wall. "Hold her," he barked. The second man complied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders to pin her. The smell of stale sweat and cigarettes filled her nose, making her gag. She bucked against him, screaming until her throat burned, her cries mingling with the sound of tearing fabric as her backpack straps began to give way. Somewhere to her left, she heard a voice. A man, uncertain. "Hey! Stop that!" For a heartbeat, hope flickered. But when she turned her head, she saw only hesitation on the bystander's face. He hovered near the curb, torn between intervening and retreating. When the attackers glared at him, he lowered his gaze and hurried away. Cowardice was louder than courage tonight. Marisol's strength began to falter. Her hands, slippery with sweat, lost their grip on the bag's strap. The attackers seized the opportunity, jerking it down off one shoulder, then the other. The weight lifted from her body, but instead of relief, dread crashed over her. "No, please," she begged, her voice raw. She lunged for the bag as they pulled it toward them, but one of the men shoved her hard. She sprawled onto the pavement, her palms scraping open, pain tearing through her skin. Her papers scattered further now, lifted by the breeze and tumbling into the street. She crawled desperately after them, scooping one, two, then another, before a heavy boot stomped down inches from her hand. The attacker sneered, kicking the papers away. "This isn't your night, girl," he said. Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was fury, maybe it was pure survival. But Marisol surged upward, slamming her shoulder into his stomach. The move startled him enough to make him stumble, but not enough to drop the bag. His partner roared, swinging his arm and catching her across the side of her face. The blow wasn't clean, more a glancing strike than a solid hit, but it spun her vision, leaving stars bursting across her eyes. Her knees buckled. She clung to consciousness, her mind screaming, "Don't black out. Don't you dare black out." On the edge of her blurred sight, she saw the glow of the bus stop again. So close, yet impossibly far. She tried to crawl toward it, dragging herself across the concrete, but the man yanked her back by the hood of her jacket. "Stay down," he growled. She choked on a sob. Her voice cracked as she begged, "Please, it's just school papers. Just let me keep it, please." They didn't care. To them, the bag wasn't a symbol of years of work and sacrifice. It was loot. Money, electronics, things they could pawn off before sunrise. Her pleas meant nothing. The zipper gave way fully, and the laptop clattered halfway out. One man grinned, tugging at it with greedy fingers. Rage surged through her again. She lunged, slamming both her hands down on the laptop, refusing to let it go. "It's mine," she screamed, her voice cracking with a mix of terror and fury. The attacker yanked harder, nearly lifting her with the force of his pull. She dangled from the laptop for a heartbeat before her grip faltered. She tumbled backward, her back slamming against the sidewalk, pain jolting through her spine. Above her, their shadows loomed. The taller man stuffed the laptop back into the bag, while the other grabbed a fistful of her hair, forcing her head back. Her cry pierced the night, sharp and desperate. That was when she realized no one was coming. The city, usually so alive, had turned its back. The people who had glanced, who had slowed, had chosen distance over intervention. In that moment, Marisol felt the cold truth. She was alone. Yet even in her terror, something stubborn flared within her. A refusal. If this night was to be written into her life, she would not let it end with her cowering in silence. Summoning every ounce of strength, she spat in the face of the man holding her hair. The action shocked him enough to make him recoil with a curse, wiping his cheek. His grip loosened, and she rolled away, scrambling to her knees. Her chest heaved as she tried to stand, blood dripping from her scraped hands, her cheek throbbing from the strike. The second man snarled, "You're making this worse for yourself." She staggered backward, shielding herself with trembling arms, her voice hoarse but unbroken. "You can't take it. You can't. The two men shared a glance, irritation flashing across their faces. They had expected an easy victim. Instead, they found resistance. For a moment, the standoff felt endless. Her trembling but defiant, them greedy but cautious, the tension thick enough to choke on. And then, from the far end of the street, another sound cut through the chaos. A voice, firm, steady, commanding, "Stand down." The sound of the officer's command hadn't come yet. For now, all that existed was chaos. Raw, messy, terrifying chaos. Marisol was on her knees, one hand scraped raw from the pavement, the other locked stubbornly on the strap of her backpack. The men yanked and tore at it as though it were an object with no meaning, no story, no life. But to her, it was everything. Every time their hands tugged, she saw not just fabric straining at the seams, but her scholarship essays, her saved paychecks, her future slipping through their fingers. The zipper had split open fully, and the contents spilled like a wound. Loose pages scattered into the street, the wind catching them and sending them spinning. A neighbor's cat skittered across the alley mouth and startled her, but the attackers didn't even glance at it. Their attention was entirely on her resistance. "Stop fighting," one of them barked, his voice sharp and edged with impatience. He jerked the bag again, lifting her halfway off the ground. Her knees screamed in pain, but she clung tighter, wrapping the strap around her wrist. Her voice cracked as she screamed for help. "Somebody, please." For the briefest moment, she thought she heard footsteps quicken nearby. A man in a brown jacket appeared at the edge of the block. He froze, taking in the scene, his eyes darting between her and the two men. Marisol's heart leapt with hope. But then his expression shifted, a flash of fear, then calculation. He pulled his collar higher around his face and turned away, vanishing into the night. The betrayal stung almost as much as the attacker's blows. One of them shoved her shoulder hard. "Shut up, girl." She staggered sideways, her elbow slamming into the pavement. Pain shot through her arm, but she refused to release the strap. Tears blurred her vision, hot and humiliating, but they did nothing to weaken her grip. "You're wasting time," the taller one growled at his partner. "Just grab it and run." "I'm trying." The other snapped, tugging harder. The strap dug cruelly into her wrist, biting until her skin felt raw. Her voice cracked again, but it wasn't just fear anymore. Rage surged into her throat. "It's mine," she shouted, as if sheer conviction could make them understand. The taller man laughed bitterly. Not anymore. Her documents, the ones she had spent sleepless nights writing, danced in the wind. One skidded beneath the wheel of a passing car, smearing into mud. Another lifted high, disappearing into the dark sky. The sight cut her deeper than the scrapes on her hands. It felt like watching her dreams tear away piece by piece. She lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch a page that had landed nearby. But the movement cost her. The shorter man yanked the bag free from her wrapped wrist, snapping the strap with a brutal rip. She cried out, her hand burning from the sudden release. "No!" The taller attacker grabbed her by the jacket collar and shoved her down again, his face inches from hers. His breath stank of cigarettes and cheap beer. "Stay down," he snarled, pushing her head toward the pavement. But something inside Marisol rebelled. She twisted her neck, teeth bared, and bit his wrist. The taste of sweat and salt filled her mouth. He yelped, jerking back in shock, releasing his grip. "You crazy!" He spat, shaking his hand. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, reaching for the bag. Her scraped palms screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She grabbed the corner of the backpack just as the shorter man tried to sling it over his shoulder. Her body jolted as the two of them began dragging it between them, her frame no match for their strength. Yet she didn't let go. Somewhere deep inside, instinct told her this wasn't just about the bag anymore. If she surrendered it, she would be surrendering more than paper and electronics. She'd be surrendering proof that she could fight for herself. Proof that she wasn't just a victim, waiting to be written into someone else's crime report. Her fingernails bent painfully backward as she clutched the nylon fabric. The men cursed, yanking harder. Her body scraped across the ground, her jeans tearing open at the knees, blood seeping into the fibers. Above them, the street lamp flickered again, the buzzing sound like static, filling the silence between shouts. It illuminated her struggle in flashes, like a strobe capturing a nightmare frame by frame. Her desperate face, their sneering grins, the shredded papers tumbling away. Her cries filled the street, yet no one stepped in. Windows glowed faintly above the shops, curtains twitching, shadows moving. She knew people were watching, but no one opened their door. No one called out. The world had shrunk to her and them, predator and prey. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her body ached, but her will clung harder than her hands could. "You can't take it." She screamed again, her voice echoing down the empty street. The taller attacker lost patience. He released the bag and grabbed her instead, his fingers closing like a vice around her hair. He yanked, forcing her head back, exposing her face to the dim glow of the streetlight. Tears streaked down her cheeks, mixing with sweat and dirt, but her eyes blazed. "Enough!" he growled. The shorter man smirked, finally pulling the bag free. "Got it," he said triumphantly, holding it aloft like a trophy. Marisol's chest clenched as though someone had crushed it in their fist. She lunged again, only for the taller man to slam her back against the wall. Her skull rattled from the impact. The world tilted, her vision spinning, but she refused to crumple. "No," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Please," the shorter man crouched, digging through the bag quickly, tossing papers aside without care. "Laptop's here," he muttered, tugging it free. His grin widened. Marisol's body moved before her mind could. She hurled herself forward, both hands clawing at the device. For a split second, she had it, her fingers gripping its edge, pulling it back toward her. Her voice ripped the night apart. "It's mine!" The taller attacker roared in frustration. He shoved her so hard she flew backward, her spine scraping along the brick wall before collapsing to the ground. For a moment, she lay there, dazed, her chest heaving. The edges of her vision darkened. And then, a sound. Not hers, not theirs. A voice, calm, steady, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Stand down." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The tone carried more power than any scream, more weight than the fists or kicks that had filled the street. Everything froze. The attackers stiffened, their eyes widening, their bodies caught mid-motion, like animals sensing a predator far greater than themselves. Marisol, panting on the ground, blinked through blurred vision toward the source of the voice. At the end of the block, a figure stood, upright, composed, one hand hovering near his holster, the other raised slightly, palm open in a gesture, both warning and command. The officer's presence shifted the air itself. The night, moments ago suffocating with fear, now vibrated with authority. For the first time, Marisol felt the faintest thread of safety weave itself back into her unraveling world. "Stand down." The words didn't ring out like a siren. They weren't barked in panic or shouted in rage. They landed with a steadiness that carried its own kind of violence, the quiet violence of certainty. The attackers froze. Marisol felt the shift in their bodies before she even turned her head. The grip on her arm loosened slightly, not out of mercy, but out of the shock of being caught in a force greater than their own. Her eyes darted toward the end of the block, still blurred with tears. Through the haze she saw him, a uniformed officer, tall, steady, his frame outlined by the halo of a streetlight. His hand rested casually near his holster, but it wasn't the gun that made him dangerous. It was the stillness of his stance, the command in his voice, the way the air itself seemed to still around him. The taller attacker cursed under his breath, his bravado wobbling. The shorter one, still clutching her laptop, darted a glance at his partner. He wanted to run, but indecision rooted his feet. The officer stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every step carried authority. His boots echoed against the pavement, each sound magnified in the silence of the block. Marisol, trembling on the ground, felt a wave of conflicting emotions crash over her. Relief, sharp and sudden. Shame, for having been brought so low in front of strangers. And above all, hope, fragile, almost unbearable hope. For the first time since the attack began, she believed she might survive with more than bruises. "Drop it," the officer said, his voice calm, even. The shorter man tightened his grip on the laptop. His jaw worked nervously, his fingers twitching. The taller one spat to the side, trying to reassert dominance. "This ain't your business, man," he snarled. The officer's gaze didn't waver. "It became my business the second you put hands on her." He tilted his chin slightly toward Marisol, acknowledging her without looking away from them. "Let her go. Drop the bag. Walk away." Something in the way he said it made it clear he wasn't making suggestions. These were orders, wrapped in a voice that didn't tremble. The taller attacker shifted his weight, tugging Marisol closer by the strap, still twisted around her wrist. She cried out as it bit into her skin again. His partner hissed, "Let's just go." "Forget it. Shut up," the tall one snapped, though his own voice carried an edge of uncertainty. The officer stopped a few paces away, his hand still resting near his holster, not drawing, not threatening, just ready. "I said stand down," he repeated, softer this time, but no less commanding. The words seemed to ripple outward, pressing into the attacker's bravado, eroding it. The silence stretched. Somewhere above, a curtain twitched. A window cracked open just slightly. The city was watching now, but in secret, cautious. Marisol swallowed hard, her throat raw. She dared to meet the officer's eyes for a split second. They were calm, steady, unflinching. It wasn't just authority there. It was control. For the first time in her life, she realized how much weight a voice could carry when it refused to waver. The shorter man shifted again, visibly rattled. He glanced around, as if calculating escape routes. "We can take her and go," he muttered to his partner. "Come on." The taller man didn't move. His jaw clenched, eyes flicking between Marisol and the officer. He wasn't ready to surrender the prize. Pride wrapped around him tighter than the backpack strap. "Last chance," the officer said. His tone was the same, but there was steel under it now, the kind that brooked no argument. The taller attacker's chest heaved. He yanked Marisol once more, as if testing her will, as if showing the officer he wasn't afraid. But she clung stubbornly, her scraped palms pressed against the bag, her teeth clenched. Even through her exhaustion, she refused to let them win. The officer's gaze sharpened. Let her go. Something cracked then, not in Marisol, not in the officer, but in the attackers. They were used to fear. They knew how to wield it, how to feed off it. But here was someone who didn't flinch, who didn't shout, who didn't beg. His authority wasn't noise. It was silence that suffocated. The shorter one broke first. He dropped the laptop back into the bag with a frustrated grunt. "Forget it, man. We're done." The taller one glared at him, torn between rage and reality. His grip on Marisol lingered for a heartbeat longer, his knuckles whitening as if he wanted to make one last point. But then, slowly, he released her. The strap slid from her wrist, leaving behind an angry red welt. Marisol collapsed backward onto the pavement, clutching the bag to her chest as if it were a shield. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, tears streaking down her dirt-smeared cheeks. The officer's stance didn't change. He hadn't moved an inch closer, but his presence filled the street. "Walk away," he said. The taller man muttered a curse, shoving his partner roughly. Together, they backed into the shadows of the alley. The officer's eyes tracked them the entire time, unblinking, his hand never straying from its ready position. The darkness swallowed them whole, and then silence again. Marisol clung to the bag, sobbing softly. Relief and shock mingled in her chest, leaving her trembling so hard she could barely breathe. Only then did the officer shift his attention fully to her. His voice softened, though it carried the same steadiness. "You're safe now." He crouched beside her, keeping his movements measured, unthreatening. "Can you stand?" Her lips trembled as she nodded. She tried to rise, but her knees buckled immediately, the sting of raw scrapes burning. He extended his hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. She stared at it for a moment, before finally placing her own in his. His grip was firm but gentle, grounding her. As she stood, clutching the torn bag to her chest, the officer glanced at the papers scattered along the street. Some were ruined, smeared with dirt, but others remained salvageable. Without a word, he stooped and began gathering them. Marisol blinked, stunned, as he held them out to her. She accepted them with shaking hands, hugging them close. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He studied her for a moment, then gave a single nod. "You held your ground," he said simply. "That matters." Her chest tightened, fresh tears threatening to spill. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Steady, measured, certain. The same voice that had cut through chaos and turned the night around. For the first time in what felt like hours, Marisol let herself breathe. The silence that followed the command was heavy, stretched taut like a rope pulled to its breaking point. For Marisol, kneeling with her backpack crushed against her chest, every second dragged like an eternity. The officer stood still at the end of the block, his form etched sharp against the faint orange glow of the streetlight, while the attackers hovered in indecision. Neither man moved to retreat just yet. The shorter one had already dropped the laptop back into the bag, but his eyes darted nervously toward the alley's mouth, calculating escape routes. The taller one lingered, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, chest rising and falling with ragged defiance. Pride clung to him like armor, refusing to let him step away without a final display of control. "Don't do something you'll regret," the officer said, his tone measured. His voice carried no rush, no panic, just steady authority, each word spaced with intent. "It's over. You walk away now. No one else gets hurt." The taller man sneered, spitting onto the cracked pavement. "You think you can talk us down?" His voice wavered faintly, undermining the bravado. The officer didn't flinch. He took a single step closer, his boots echoing like drumbeats. "I don't need to talk you down. You already know how this ends. Let it go." Marisol gripped her backpack tighter, her fingers trembling. She could feel her pulse racing in her throat, each beat thundering. She wanted to shrink into the ground, to disappear entirely, but she forced herself to keep her eyes open. Watching, waiting, the shorter man shifted uneasily, tugging at his partner's sleeve. "Come on, Nan. We're wasting time. Cops'll be crawling all over here in a minute." His voice cracked, betraying the panic creeping into him. The taller attacker shook him off violently, glaring at the officer. "We don't run from anyone. Then you fall," the officer replied calmly. His voice held no malice, no challenge, just truth, spoken as if it were an immutable fact. The taller man's face twisted, caught between fury and fear. His pride demanded he lash out, but something deeper, instinct, survival, pulled him back. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of a car passing at the far end of the block, oblivious to the storm unraveling here. Marisol could barely breathe. She felt the air pressing on her chest, heavy with the weight of decisions she had no control over. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, but her legs were weak, trembling. She remained frozen, the bag clutched against her like a lifeline. The officer shifted slightly, lowering his raised hand just enough to appear non-threatening, though his other hand remained poised near his holster. "You think this is worth it?" he asked quietly, almost conversationally. "A backpack? A laptop? That's all you've got to show for tonight?" The shorter man's shoulders sagged. His eyes darted to the officer, then to Marisol, then back again. His resolve was crumbling fast. "This ain't worth it," he muttered. "Not with him here." "Shut up!" The taller one barked, though the bite in his words was fading. The officer pressed forward, his voice unwavering. "You're standing on the edge of a decision. One way, you run. You live to figure out a better night. The other way, you fight. And this ends badly. For you, not me. You already know which way it tilts." The taller man clenched his fists, knuckles whitening. His eyes flicked toward the officer's holster, then back to his unflinching stare. The unspoken truth hung heavy. One wrong move, and he wouldn't walk away. Marisol caught the tremor in his stance, the split second of hesitation. She saw the mask slipping, the bravado cracking, the fear seeping through. "Let's go," the shorter man urged again, tugging harder this time. "Forget the girl. Forget the bag. Let's move." The taller man growled, frustration boiling inside him, but he didn't step closer. His pride wanted violence, but his instincts screamed retreat. His chest heaved as he wrestled with the choice. The officer didn't push. He didn't shout. He let the silence do the work. He simply stood, a mountain of steadiness, radiating a power that came not from weapons, but from control. Finally, the taller attacker hissed a curse under his breath. He shoved his partner, anger redirected. "Fine," he snapped, his voice harsh but hollow. "We're done." The officer didn't move, his eyes tracking them as they began to back away. "Slow," he instructed, his voice firm again. No sudden moves. The two men complied, retreating step by step. The taller one glared at Marisol one last time, his expression a mix of resentment and wounded pride. The shorter one avoided her eyes entirely, his body tense, eager to disappear into the night. They slipped into the alley's shadows, swallowed by darkness. Their footsteps echoed briefly before fading into silence. For a long moment, the block remained still. The officer didn't relax immediately. His eyes lingered on the alley, his body a coiled spring, waiting for the possibility of return. Only when he was certain the threat had passed did his shoulders ease slightly. Marisol exhaled shakily, the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding rushing out of her. Her body sagged against the wall, exhaustion washing over her in a wave so heavy she thought she might collapse. The officer finally turned his full attention to her. He approached slowly, his movements measured. "They won't be back," he said quietly. Her throat worked as she tried to speak, but the words stuck. All she could manage was a shaky nod, her eyes wide and wet. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of the edge it had carried moments before. She clutched the bag tighter, nodding again, though her knees trembled beneath her. The officer crouched, gathering the last of her scattered papers. Some were smeared, torn, lost to the wind, but he collected what he could, stacking them neatly before handing them to her. "These matter to you." Tears blurred her vision as she accepted them with trembling hands. "There? Everything?" she whispered hoarsely. He nodded once, as if he understood more than she'd said. "Then we'll make sure you keep them." For a long moment, they stood in the dim glow of the streetlight, the aftermath of violence, the weight of fear slowly dissolving. The alley was quiet now, but the echoes of what had just unfolded lingered in the cracks of the pavement, in the torn edges of her papers, in the bruise blossoming on her arm. But amid that wreckage, one thing was clear. The steady voice had held, and it had changed everything. The alley had swallowed them. The taller man's curses still echoed faintly, bouncing off brick and concrete before fading altogether. The shorter one had not looked back once, too desperate to vanish into the maze of shadows. For a while, Marisol's ears strained, half expecting their footsteps to return, half bracing for another ambush. But there was only silence now, the kind of silence that follows a storm. She slumped against the wall, her chest heaving. The bag was pressed so tightly against her ribs that she could feel the zipper's teeth biting through her jacket. She didn't loosen her grip, though. Even with the danger gone, she couldn't yet convince herself the fight was truly over. The officer remained alert for a moment longer, his posture still firm, gaze fixed on the alley's mouth, as though daring them to reappear. Only when several long seconds passed did he finally lower his hand from the holster. His shoulders loosened, though his presence did not diminish. He turned toward Marisol at last. "They're gone," he said simply. The words washed over her like warm water after frostbite. Relief spread through her body, but it was tangled with disbelief. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. Her throat felt too raw, her voice buried under everything she had just endured. The officer closed the distance slowly, giving her time to process. His boots scuffed lightly against the pavement. He stopped a few feet away, crouching down to her level. "You're safe now," he added, his tone gentler than before. Her knees trembled. She wanted to nod, to confirm it, but the adrenaline still roared in her veins, demanding she stay alert, that she not let her guard down. It took a moment before her head bobbed in the smallest of nods. "Can I see your hands?" he asked. Her eyes widened, but his calm expression soothed her panic. She slowly lifted her scraped palms from around the backpack, wincing at the raw abrasion streaked with dirt and tiny pebbles. Blood welled in shallow cuts, already beginning to dry. "You held on hard," the officer said, not as criticism but as acknowledgement. He studied her hands briefly, then nodded. "You'll need to clean those, but they'll heal." Marisol let out a shaky laugh that surprised her. It sounded brittle, almost broken, but it was laughter nonetheless. I couldn't let go," she whispered. "I saw," he replied. "That kind of fight, it's not something everyone has." Her chest tightened, her tears threatening again. She pressed her lips together, swallowing back the sob that tried to rise. The officer rose to his feet and extended his hand. "Come on. Let's get you standing." For a moment she hesitated, staring at his open palm. The last time she'd been pulled, it had been by the attackers, their hands cruel and unrelenting. But the officer's hand was steady, waiting, unhurried. She placed her own trembling hand in his. He helped her up carefully, guiding her without jerking, without force. Her legs quivered beneath her weight, and she swayed, but his presence steadied her. Once upright, she hugged the bag closer, her entire body curling protectively around it. The officer noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he glanced down at the mess littered across the street. Her papers. They were everywhere, scattered like autumn leaves, some edges torn, others stained. The officer bent down and began to gather them. His movements were methodical, patient. One by one, He stacked them into a neat pile. Marisol blinked, stunned. You? Don't have to, she began, her voice barely audible. I know, he said, not looking up. But they matter to you. Her throat tightened. She bit her lip to hold back another wave of tears as he straightened and handed the stack to her. She cradled them against her chest like fragile treasure. Even the ruined ones, she thought. Even the ruined ones are proof I didn't lose everything. She found her voice again, hoarse but insistent. Thank you. The officer gave a single nod, his gaze steady. What's your name? Marisol, she whispered. Marisol, he repeated, as though anchoring her back into herself. You did well tonight. You survived. The word survived lodged deep inside her. She had been clinging so fiercely to her belongings that she hadn't thought of herself in those terms. But it was true. She had survived. Her knees were raw, her palms shredded, her body aching, but she was still here. Still breathing. The officer pulled a small notepad from his pocket, scribbling briefly before tucking it away. I'll need to take a statement later, but not now. Right now, the priority is you, Marisol nodded numbly. Her focus remained fixed on the bag in her arms, the papers stacked precariously against her chest. She couldn't bring herself to let go yet. The officer studied her, then spoke again, quieter this time. You know, most people would have let go when they grabbed the bag. You didn't. I couldn't, she said again, her voice breaking. Everything. Everything's in here. She swallowed hard, struggling to put the weight of her words into sound. My future. My. Everything. His expression softened slightly. Then you fought for the right thing. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed her forehead to the edge of the backpack, her shoulders trembling. The officer didn't interrupt, didn't tell her to be strong or quiet. He let her cry. The sound echoed softly in the empty street, a release of all the fear she'd been holding in. When she finally lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, the officer didn't look at her with pity. His gaze carried respect. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you somewhere safe. Marisol nodded, her grip on her bag loosening just slightly, enough that it rested instead of crushed against her chest. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, her body reminding her of every scrape, every bruise. But with the officer walking beside her, steady and silent, she felt the first faint flicker of security returning. The city around them remained indifferent. Cars passed in the distance, neon signs buzzed faintly, windows glowed above. To anyone else, it was an ordinary night. But for Marisol, it was the night she discovered just how much strength desperation could summon, and how powerful a steady voice could be. By the time they reached the brighter end of the block, she dared to believe she was no longer a victim clinging to survival. She was a survivor, carrying her future in her arms. And though her papers were torn, though her hands were raw, nothing had been ripped from her that she could not reclaim. The next morning, sunlight streamed across Marisol's small apartment, painting the walls in soft gold. The warmth should have felt comforting, but instead it highlighted every bruise, every ache, every reminder of the night before. She lay still on her couch, her bag cradled beside her, like a wounded animal she refused to release. Sleep had come only in brief snatches, fractured by nightmares where shadowy figures lunged from alleys, their hands ripping her work from her arms. Each time she startled awake, her first reflex was to clutch the bag tighter, just to be certain it was still there. Now in the daylight, she dared to unzip it. Slowly, carefully, she opened it wide, half afraid she'd find it empty. But the laptop sat where it belonged, battered but unharmed. Her stack of papers was torn and crumpled, some pages smudged beyond repair, others clinging stubbornly to legibility. She smoothed them with shaking hands, each page feeling like proof of her own stubborn will to hold on. Her palms throbbed, raw and red where the nylon strap had cut into her. She reached for the small first aid kit she kept under her sink, dabbing the wounds with disinfectant. The sting made her hiss, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. She wrapped the worst of them in gauze, then sat back, staring at her hands. These hands, she thought. These hands fought. She had never thought of herself as strong. Persistent, maybe. Stubborn, certainly. But strength had always been something she attributed to others. Athletes, heroes, people who seemed born to resist. She'd always imagined herself as someone who avoided danger, someone who stayed out of the way. Yet last night, when everything she valued most had been ripped at, her hands had refused to let go. Her phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it, wincing at the pull in her muscles. A text message blinked on the screen. Officer Daniels. Checking in. How are you holding up? She stared at the words, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected him to follow up. She had thought once he escorted her home and filed his report, that would be the end of it. Just another case number in a city full of them. But here he was, reaching through the silence of her apartment with the same steady voice, this time in writing. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Finally, she typed, Marisol. Sore, shaken, but safe. Thank you. The reply came almost immediately. Officer Daniels. Safe is what matters. You did more than most would have. Be proud of that. Tears pricked her eyes again. She set the phone down, clutching her bandaged hands together. Be proud. The words felt impossible and true all at once. Later that day, she forced herself to step outside. The street where it had happened was quiet now, just another strip of pavement lined with shuttered shops and faint graffiti. To any stranger, it looked ordinary. To her, it looked haunted. Her steps faltered as she neared the corner, her body remembering the tug, the blows, the fear. She almost turned back. But then she remembered his voice. Stand down. Not shouted. Not panicked. Just steady. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and forced herself forward. The memory still hurt, but it also reminded her she wasn't alone in that moment. Someone had stood for her when no one else had. Someone had spoken with a calm so unshakable it had changed the outcome. She reached the exact spot where her papers had scattered, where her knees had scraped the pavement. She knelt briefly, touching the ground, half expecting to feel the tremor of that night still trapped in the concrete. But there was only cool stone beneath her fingers. She straightened again, whispering softly, I'm still here. In the days that followed, the bruises bloomed across her skin, each one a dark reminder. Her body ached, but it healed. Her papers were patched with tape and rewritten, the ruined ones retyped with a determination fiercer than before. But it was the memory of the officer's steady voice that lingered most. It returned in moments of doubt, when she hesitated before walking home late, when she questioned if she was strong enough to face challenges ahead. She carried it with her, not as someone else's authority, but as a reminder of what steadiness could do, even in the worst storm. Weeks later, when she finally mailed her applications, she slipped a note into the envelope with one of them. Not for the committee, but for herself. A single line scrawled at the bottom of the last page. You fought for this. Don't forget. That night in the alley could have broken her. It could have stolen more than her papers, more than her laptop. It could have stolen her will. Instead, because she had refused to let go, and because one steady voice had met chaos with calm, she walked forward carrying something new. The knowledge that strength wasn't loud, wasn't violent. Sometimes strength was steady, and steady was enough.